buildings and jobs and these rat races and these systems that stop us from looking up to marvel or looking around or even looking down at your hands. Like sometimes I just look at my hands and I'm like, holy crap, like I'm doing stuff with these hands. Like it's amazing. It's like, can we pause?
Yeah.
You know, when you get into a place where there's lots of space, you tend to pause a little more, right? When you know, I talk about this a lot when I teach my 4-year-old niece. If you hang out with a 4-year-old, they're not moving very fast. They are amazed by every single stone and rock. And I've told this story when I teach, like, you know, we live in a little dead end. And for like months, my niece would come over. She must have been like 2.5. And I'm like, we're walking to the end of the street. And I'm like trying to get her to the end of the street. And like, I'm teaching you how to get somewhere. And she's like pausing and things are amazing. These stones and twigs and a leaf and a flower. And I'm like, you are wasting time. Like, we're getting to the end of the street. And then one day I was like, oh, I'm not teaching her to get somewhere. She's teaching me to pause, to like be amazed by a stone that is a tiny grain of dust in a massive universe of things. And she's taught me something because now I look down once in a while, a lot more than I used to. And every day, hopefully a little more. And if I forget, she comes over and she reminds me again. You know, and I think it's the same thing when we cover the earth with concrete, which isn't that marvelous. And we build walls of steel and stone and glass, unless they're architecturally beautiful. Yeah. Which we don't do enough.
No.
Like, so most of the stuff just it dulls us.
I think people don't understand one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is how, because I've been connecting things to the physiological basis, because we wouldn't be able to perceive these certain things without the inner capacity. If our bodies weren't like organized in such a way to be able to see color, for example, to hear certain frequencies, and there's waves of light we can't see and frequencies we can't hear. And one of the things we're able to perceive is beauty. And I find that so crazy. Well, we've evolved to see beautiful things and recognize it. You know what I mean? And we're constructing buildings and skyscrapers without that in mind. And are we dispensing with something that we can't do without? I think we need to have beauty. And I mean, it takes longer and it's more expensive to build beautiful structures. But I mean, the tourism money generated by people flocking to Europe to see these ancient buildings that are just jaw-dropping. I haven't personally seen any of them. Robin, you've been to Germany. Yeah, it's like people... London. That's more than paid for itself. Absolutely. All that stuff.
It pays for some repairs.
Yeah.
Like the admission to some of the churches that I went to. My mom loves genealogy, so we trekked all over Germany so that she could kind of trace back our roots. And,
cool.
A lot of the places there was an admission to go into these churches, and it is for upkeep, and that's the way that the German government is now dedicating themselves to maintaining their structures. And it's like, there was not like almost any of the churches that didn't have some form of scaffolding somewhere, that they were in some sort of repair, and that's how you maintain these types of buildings. And maybe it isn't the most pragmatic thing if you really want to look at, like, you drop a rectangle down and fill it full of stuff and people will go in there, and that's how the space is utilized. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be made into something more, and that's the whole joy of architecture, right? Like,
they can both exist.
Yeah.
For sure.
You know, you can greenify cities again. It is all possible. Yeah. Like, being able to marvel at either what's around us or what we make, I think is that same thing, right? Like that seeing of beauty. It's just forces you to pause. And maybe there is a system in place in which they don't need people to pause. They need people to go, to move, to get to work, to do your work, to keep your head down, and to get the heck out so you have enough time to sleep so you can show up again tomorrow and do it. So, you know, that's a whole nother conversation. But, like, I do get that. When you live in places where there's beauty, life is slower.
Yeah. I think that's part of the point of art, like with beautiful paintings and music. It's the whole point is to... produce a transcendental experience where you're just stunned. It's dead in your place. Like, I've been to some concerts, even just from friends of mine. Some of my friends make amazing music. Shout out to the guys who were in Oceanic, local band. The first time I saw them, I noticed at one point that I wasn't even breathing. I just forgot. I wasn't even taking breaths, and I was like, "Oh yeah."
That's awesome.
The music I think that's what it should do. It's like when it strikes you, and the hair stands up in the back of your neck, and it's kind of one thing I was taking shots at the idea of like, you know, like meditation music or something. It's like if music is written right, it would elicit a transcendental experience.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea with all of it. It's not like you make music to meditate to. It's like you're supposed to just... That's the whole point of all of it. And if it doesn't do that, people don't want to listen to it.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't grab you.
And there is something, I get curious, like as a writer and an artist that way, you know, and when I'm writing and I'm in that zone and I come out of it and I'm like, I'll read stuff and I'm like, who wrote that? Like, it's like something moves through you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sometimes I just write and sometimes that experience happens. I get curious about that. You know, I think people who are writing stuff, you know, creating or painting, some of them will say that similar thing. They're tapping into something below the surface.
There is I studied under a teacher at NASCAD, philosophy teacher named Nick Webb, and one of the classes I took from him was the philosophy of aesthetics within art, and he taught us about this concept called duende. And duende, it doesn't really have a translation into English. It's something that started in the south of Spain, Andalusia, basically a space where flamenco was prevalent. And the whole idea was that, like in North American terms, whatever it is, when you have it, that's kind of the duende spirit. But that when you watch a performer or, you know, something that is a real source of art, and the reason why it really works well with flamenco is that if you see somebody performing, that they almost become taken over by this otherness, this other worldliness, and then it just kind of becomes the expression. Like they aren't aware, they're kind of in the grips of this thing, this duende, and then they are expressing something that is being channeled from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of that sense of what you just described. When you're no longer so aware of what you're producing, you're just allowing that creative force to flow through you and to you know, whenever it's done with you, it's what you're looking at and how, or reading or, you know, listening to if you have like a recording or something like that. But
and there's something that it pulls on. Like there's a thread in each of us that it pulls on. So you all know when it's happening. Right? People have different words for it, but and there are sometimes no words for it, but there is something that happens when we see that force. When you see it visually or you hear it or somebody's moving with it. I think of it as a reminding. It's like a remembering of something. And so that's why I think it's again a thread that comes before and is continued after. Because it's like you're remembering something. You can feel that like a lost memory, except it's beyond what you could remember.
It's like some sort of collective shared source, life source, like primordial something or other.
Something. That's what I find. Yeah, I think about consciousness sometimes, and not to claim to have any, not to know what it is at all, but it's like we're all kind of like connected and hooked up to this thing, and part of what it loves doing is making music and creating poetry and art and all these things, or just doing anything that you lose yourself in, like a martial artist would in a fight, or performing a sauna or anything like that, or a dancer, or just strictly sitting meditation, or any of those things where you lose yourself and it's like you like dissolve into this grander. It's like when the drop of rain hits the ocean metaphor. And it's just like whatever consciousness is, it's like awareness, it's perception, it's discernment, it's love, it's attention, it's judgment, it's creates art and music and language comes out of, like when someone speaks from the heart, like the use of language, it's
miraculous.
Yeah.
Like when you start to try to like wrap it up, you're like, whoa, it's huge.
Yeah, and it seems like it's us. Like the fact that we are conscious, and it seems like that's like what you are, is that's what you are, is conscious. But then we can also extract from that further and talk about it as such. And it's this weird feedback loop almost, and it's almost, I get this image of when you hold two mirrors in front of each other and it just that thing.
Yeah.
It's like when you try to turn your attention on attention.
It's like fractals.
Yes. And the second you do it, you lose it.
Yeah. Well, as soon as you were like, I got it, it's just, that's the whole.
Yeah. It just, yeah.
It's just this weird. Can't say anything about it.
Like, what are the words?
Yeah.
I don't know what the words are. Yeah.
I love that Alan Watts bit where he would have one of those bells, whatever, and he'd be like, existence is boom. So I think we're doing when we do the Om chants in yoga class.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, here's what it is.
Yeah.
And that's just, I think we're trying to represent somehow like consciousness itself as this, because you could think about it as a drone of some kind. It's like it's always there. It's always, as long as you're awake, it's always on. It's, I don't know. I have the hardest time trying to talk about this stuff.
I know.
Yeah.
And because in our minds, when we think about it, we don't have to have words.
Yeah.
Like, it can be conceptual. You can feel it. It can be just this sort of random sense of something, but it's like, okay. But as soon as you try to voice it, it's like, wow, language. Again, like, I love. But it's like, there's not enough.
Yeah.
Language tries to make it very small and tiny and simple, and it's not actually possible to encompass what we're trying to speak about necessarily. And that's why, yeah, like an Om, it's a bit above language, at least. It's vibratory, it's a sound. It resonates inside the body, but it moves out into the world.
It's vibrating.
If you Om in a room and you hit the same vibration, I don't know if this has happened to you, but it pulls your voice out of your throat.
Yeah.
It almost like, sometimes I feel like I'm going to lose my breath. My Om gets caught, and it feels like someone's pulling it out of me. And I'm like, what? I don't know if I can breathe. What's happening? So it's something that completely gets pulled out of your power, whatever it is. Like, I think that Om is so much closer, to describing consciousness than maybe our words can.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that's great about music, too, is like, well, okay, so maybe consciousness is the thing that experiences, and then experience itself might be more akin to music because you have everything from the most serene, beautiful, gentle sounds to just some of the metal I listen to, which is just so devastatingly heavy and crushing and dissonant. And it's like it mimics our lives because there are these harmonious, like joyful, light experiences, you know, and as well as these crazy, dark, just hellish experiences too. And music goes through all those. Like the music I love the most goes through all of these, expresses all of that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's why like so much of the old like Disney movies I think are all, you know, it's basically old symphony orchestral type music, because you can really convey a lot, and like what it means to be, you know, just having that proverbial dark night of the soul, and how certain sounds that's where your awareness goes when you hear that sound. And it's just this crazy relationship with the existence we have, where we can create these things that are just like music. For example, I mostly draw on music because I studied for a couple of years at SCC and played in bands and stuff, so that's like where I've put most of my efforts into as far as an artistic expression goes. But you know, it's just based off of vibrations in the air that tickle your eardrums just the right way, and then it invokes these crazy emotional experiences. And what do you make of that? It's just
I know. It's why I love, like, I don't listen to them a lot, but like I'm so aware of movie soundtracks, because you have these extremely talented composers and they're handed a story and they create the story again, musically. And it's why like some of those musical scores like sci-fi movies sometimes. Like you think of some of these epic stories, just like these musical scores are so